download our Revise It Right revision app for hundreds of videos, quizzes, exam questions, tutor support and so much more. This video is about communicable diseases. Now, a communicable disease is an infectious disease, i.e. it can spread, it can easily spread. Both plants and animals can be infected by communicable diseases, and that is because they are caused by pathogens. Now, a pathogen is a microorganism that causes disease. So, microorganism that causes disease. That's what we can describe as a pathogen. Now, there are different types of pathogens that we need to be aware of. Now, the first is a bacteria. So, bacteria is an example of a pathogen, and these are very small cells. And why they are so infectious and why they can be so infectious is because they reproduce rapidly. They reproduce rapidly. Now, bacteria divide by something called binary fission. Now, binary fission is rapid, and that's why they can reproduce really rapidly. So if you were to catch a bacteria, that can reproduce very quickly and form millions of bacteria. Now, bacteria make us ill by releasing something called a toxin, which is kind of like a poison. So they produce toxins or poisons, and these damage your cells and tissues. So that's why bacteria can make us ill. Now, a second type of pathogen is a virus. Okay, however, these are not cells. And in fact, they're actually a lot smaller than cells. Okay, but they can also reproduce rapidly. So just like bacteria, they can reproduce rapidly and replicate themselves as well. Now, these actually, and these make us feel ill because they reproduce inside your cells. So they reproduce, they live inside your cells and replicate themselves inside in your cells using your cell's machinery. Your cell will then burst, which will release all the new viruses. So the bacteria make us ill by releasing toxins that damage your cells and tissues, whereas viruses actually make us feel ill by reproducing inside of our cells, causing them to burst and then to release all new viruses, which will then reproduce themselves in your body cells. So there are two more types of pathogen that we need to learn about. So the first two, obviously, bacteria and viruses. Okay, there's also need to learn about something called a protist. Now, these are single-celled eukaryotes. Now, you'll remember a eukaryote is a cell that contains a nucleus. Bacteria are prokaryotic, they don't contain a nucleus, and viruses are not cells. But protists are single-celled eukaryotes. So their cells actually contain a nucleus. Okay. Now, some of these are parasites, which can live on or inside other organisms. Okay, so we're going to look at a good example of this in a second, which is malaria. Okay, and this is how they then cause damage. They are often transferred by something called a vector. Now, a vector is something that doesn't get infected by the disease, but it carries the protist or the pathogen. So that's, for example, with malaria, that's carried by mosquitoes. And the final pathogen that we need to talk about is the fungi. Now, some of these are single-celled and others have bodies, and what they do is grow and penetrate the skin, okay, and the surface of plants, which then go and cause disease. Okay, so bacteria release toxins and viruses reproduce inside the cells, whereas protists live on or inside other organisms, and fungi grow and penetrate the skin, which cause disease. So they're the 4 pathogens that we need to know. Remember to download our Revise It Right revision app, watch over 700 videos, answer 4,000 plus quiz questions, over 1,000 flashcards, 1,000 exam questions, worksheets, forums, and get help from qualified teachers and so much more. The link is in the description. Now these pathogens can be spread in a number of ways, the first of which is through water. Okay, now this can be drinking water, for example, if drinking water was to be contaminated. So contaminated drinking water, or it could be running through water like rivers and streams. But one way can be through water. The second way can be through air. So these can be travelled in air and then breathed in. Usually airborne pathogens are things that produce a cough or a sneeze and then can be spread from the cough through the air into another individual. They can also be transferred through direct contact, i.e. really touching a contaminated surface. So touching a contaminated surface. And the fourth way, and we've already kind of spoken about this, is for a vector. And you'll remember this is an organism that does not experience the disease themselves, but they carry the disease. So much like a mosquito carries malaria. So now we've looked at what they actually are, we need to look at examples of each of these types of diseases. And there are a few examples that we actually need to learn. Okay, so with viruses, there are 3 viruses that we need to learn about. Okay, so the first of which is measles. So measles, as he just said, is a virus, and it's spread by droplets from an infected person's sneeze or cough. So it's spread through the air. Now the symptoms really of measles are red rashes and signs of fever, i.e. high temperature. Now it can actually be really, really serious and really, really fatal if there are complications. However, most people now have been vaccinated against measles. So you would have got your measles, mumps and rubella vaccine, your MMR vaccine when you were younger, which means you'll be vaccinated against. So the way that we can prevent measles from spreading is through vaccination. Another way really is if we isolate infected individuals. So when an individual knows they have measles, they can be isolated away so they don't spread it. So the second virus that we need to learn about is HIV. Now this is transferred through sexual contact, but it can also be transferred through sharing bodily fluid in other ways. So for example, sharing a needle, so sharing blood, and it can also be passed from unborn baby from the mum to the unborn baby. Okay, so if the mum has it, the unborn baby can have it as well. So there's 3 ways that can be spread. Now initially, HIV causes flu-like symptoms. So initially we've got flu-like symptoms for a few weeks. However, over time, these can weaken the immune system. So over time, HIV will weaken the immune system. Okay. Now this will then lead the virus to start attacking the immune cells. So it'll start attacking immune cells. And in this way, really, the body's immune system is badly damaged and it can no longer cope with different infections. And at this point, the disease actually transitions into something called AIDS. Okay, now that is where the immune system is so weak that it can no longer really cope with any other disease that comes along. So other pathogens can kill or cancer, various things like that, can then go and kill the person with HIV or with AIDS because they just have a really weakened immune system. Initially, this can be controlled with antiviral drugs. However, there is no cure. There's no cure for HIV. No cure. That's because it's a virus, and viruses are hard to cure. It's the same with measles. No cure for measles either. There's a way to prevent it with vaccination, but no cure. Just with HIV, you can control it with antiviral drugs, but there is no cure. So there's two that we've learnt about, measles and HIV. The third virus that we need to learn is tobacco mosaic virus, or TMV, tobacco mosaic virus, and this infects plants. Okay, so it causes a mosaic pattern on the leaves of plants. So it causes a mosaic pattern on the leaves of plants. Now what this means is the plant becomes discoloured, and therefore it means the plant can't photosynthesize as well. Now if the plant can't photosynthesize, it's not producing enough glucose, and therefore that glucose is not going to be used efficiently for respiration. There's not going to be enough energy, and therefore it's going to affect the plant's growth. So you might then lead to something called stunted plant growth, or stunted growth. Okay, so really the way that we can treat this essentially is by burning infected plants. So if there were to be a plant that had tobacco mosaic virus, you can just take it away from the rest of the plants and burn it to ensure that it doesn't then pass that disease onto other plants. So fungal diseases then, we only need to learn about one fungal disease, and that is rose black spot. Okay, and that is another disease that affects plants. Okay, so what it means is you have purple or black spots develop on the leaves of rose plants, as it says in the name really. So black spots develop on the leaves of rose plants. And just like really with the tobacco mosaic virus, this causes a discoloration, which means that the plant can't photosynthesize as well. So as well as it could, which again can lead to stunted growth and affect plant growth. Okay, so really plants can, or farmers can treat this with fungicides, as it is a fungal disease, or just like before, you can sort of burn and destroy infected plants. So burning or destroying infected plants to ensure that it doesn't spread. So we also need to learn about one disease that's caused by a protist, and the one that we need to learn about is malaria. Okay, as I just said, it's caused by a protist. Now, part of the malaria's protist life cycle takes place in the mosquito. So a mosquito is a vector, so it's carried by a mosquito. So we call the mosquito here a vector for malaria. Okay, and what happens is these mosquitoes will feed on an animal or a human. Remember, we are animals, so feed on animals, feed on humans. And every time this mosquito feeds on another animal, it infects it. Okay, so every time it feeds on an animal, it infects that animal with the protist, which is malaria. So it is spread by the vector mosquito. Now, what malaria actually causes, or the symptoms of malaria, is repeating episodes of fever. So repeating fever, and it can actually be fatal. So the way that we can prevent this from being spread is really to try and control the mosquitoes and maybe try and prevent them from breeding. We can maybe use things like mosquito nets. So if you were to go to a country that was the prevalence of mosquitoes was high, i.e. there's lots of mosquitoes there, then you would see loads of things of mosquito nets, or you can have insect repellent or mosquito repellent to try and keep the mosquitoes away, or you can use things like insecticides. So there's lots of ways really to try and prevent malaria from infecting animals and humans. So the final ones we need to learn about, and I understand there is a lot to take in here, is bacterial diseases, and we need to learn about two of these. The first of which is Salmonella. Now Salmonella is usually a disease that most of us has heard of. It essentially causes food poisoning. So really the symptoms of food poisoning, as some of us will know, is fever, stomach cramps, and the really popular ones are vomiting and diarrhea. So they're the symptoms of Salmonella, and they are caused by the toxins that are produced from the bacteria Salmonella. You'll remember that bacteria produce toxins to make us feel ill. Now you usually get Salmonella by eating contaminated food and really uncooked food. Okay, so uncooked poultry is where you usually get Salmonella. Okay, so the way that we can then prevent this, really, number one is by making sure that you cook through your poultry. So you properly cook your poultry, and also wash down surfaces where the poultry has been cooked on. Okay, in the UK we also reduce the risk of Salmonella by vaccinating. So we vaccinate our chickens to ensure that they don't carry the Salmonella bacteria, and turkeys as well, of course. This controls the spread of the disease. Okay, so lots of symptoms there, lots of ways we can get it, and lots of ways we can prevent us from getting it. And there's one more disease that we need to learn about, and that is also another bacterial disease, and that is gonorrhea. Okay, now gonorrhea is a sexually transmitted disease, and therefore we get it through sexual intercourse. They're passed on through sexual contact. So it's caused by bacteria, as I just said, and therefore it causes issues by releasing toxins. Okay, the main symptoms of gonorrhea are pain while urinating, but also a green and yellow discharge from penis or vagina. Okay, so they are the main symptoms of gonorrhea. Now, as it's a bacteria, just like Salmonella, we can treat them with antibiotics. Okay, remember, antibiotics are used to treat bacterial diseases, and only bacterial diseases, not viral diseases. And therefore you can use antibiotics to treat both gonorrhea and Salmonella. Okay, but the way that really we can prevent ourselves from getting gonorrhea in the first place is really by using a barrier method. We call them a barrier method of contraception, i.e. really the condom. Okay, this will prevent the spread of STIs, as it prevents you from sharing the bodily fluid. Now, a final thing we need to learn about in this topic is ways that we can actually prevent the spread of diseases. And we've thrown a few of them out when we looked at viral, fungal, protist and bacterial diseases, but let's just summarise them now. So number one, big one, is hygiene. We can prevent the spread of certain diseases by being hygienic, by washing hands, by making sure you prepare food properly, making sure you sneeze into a tissue and then you bin that tissue. All these ways are going to prevent the spread of disease. Number two, if the disease is caused by a vector, or passed around by a vector I should say, then trying to destroy these vectors or controlling these vectors can help prevent the spread of disease. Now there are tons of mosquitoes about, so destroying them all would be very, very hard, but you can start to control them by using mosquito nets, by using repellents to keep them away from humans. Number three, you can also isolate infected individuals. Okay, so as soon as an individual has a particular virus or bacteria, then isolate them. Keep them away from everyone else, and that is one way we can reduce the spread. And the fourth way, and it's what we saw in measles, is by vaccination. Vaccinating people against different pathogens is a really good way of really reducing the spread of that disease. The prevalence of measles now in the country is very, very, very low compared to what it was before the vaccination. So I know it's been a very long video, but I'd like you to now have a go at answering these 7 questions, and I'll go through the answers after. So pause the video now. So question 1, what is a pathogen? Well, we can describe a pathogen as a microorganism that causes disease. Okay, so a microorganism that causes disease. List the different types of pathogen. Well, we looked at 4, so we got the virus, we got the bacteria, we got the fungi, and we got the protist. So 2 diseases caused by bacteria. Well, we've learnt about 2. So we've got salmonella, and we've also got gonorrhea. So 2 diseases caused by viruses. Well, we actually learned about 3 of these. So any 2 from measles, HIV, TMV, tobacco and mosaic virus. What are 3 ways pathogens can spread? Well, again, we learned 4, but let's go through 3. So water, direct contact, through a vector, direct contact through a vector, and then also through the air. What do bacteria release to make us ill? Where we release something called a toxin. And finally, how do bacteria divide? I very briefly mentioned this at the start, by binary fission. Remember, that's very quick, therefore they can produce very quick. So you've now learnt lots of information about various different types of communicable diseases. You've learnt viral, fungal, protist and bacterial diseases, their symptoms, how we can prevent it, the spread of disease, and then how we can reduce the spread of disease. So lots of information there. So make sure you now test yourself using the quiz and the exam questions on the website. And if there was anything you didn't understand, then please do get in contact with one of our tutors if you are a paying member, and they will happily help you out.